Inspirational Creatives, episode 175. Welcome to Inspirational Creatives. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. Join me every Friday as I chat with successful artists, producers, and creative entrepreneurs who share powerful stories and strategies. They can help you to create the life that you want. Listen each week as these inspirational creatives show you how to take your creativity to the next level. You'll learn how to create a sustainable business that inspires others and gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. Thanks for listening. Make sure you sign up at inspirationalcreatives.com to get free exclusive bonus material. And now, on with the show. Rob here, and welcome to another episode of Inspirational Creatives. My guest today is a podcaster, blogger, software engineer and web designer who has worked for various Fortune 500 companies. Having been invited to be a guest on her own podcast show, The Social Sidekick, I immediately returned the compliment as I was fascinated to learn more about her own journey, which has involved making the transition from computer professional to creative entrepreneur. This transition is one I know many listeners are considering, and in some way, Laurie's journey seems to reflect that of my own. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you on the show today, Laurie Solgon. Laurie, welcome.
Rob, I am so excited to be on your show. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So for those yet to meet you, Laurie, what would you like to add to my introduction to give our listener a deeper sense of who you are?
Well, many of us have worked for other people for most of our careers, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur for many years. It's just that I didn't know what I wanted to do because as my regular job as a software engineer, I was doing what I wanted to do. But sometimes working for other people can be just so unsatisfying. So I've been trying different things. In fact, I kind of did this when I went to college years ago. I didn't know what I wanted to do then. I was originally a theater major, but realized I didn't want to wait tables all my life trying to make it big, so to speak. So I tried this kind of class and that kind of class, and then took a computer class and realized this is what I was supposed to do. This is what my brain was meant for. And I'm kind of doing that now because I want to be in charge of my own destiny. I'm willing to work really hard and be motivated and do whatever it takes. I just don't know what that is. So I've started blogging. I've, again, done the podcast to meet other people and find out what they do. And in a way, it's kind of like dipping my toe back in the water, because finding what other people do may inspire me to do something similar to figure out what I really want to do with my entrepreneurial journey.
Right. So tell me about how that's going for you at the moment. I mean, what have you learned so far?
I went to WordCamp in Phoenix because I live in Arizona. I went to WordCamp a few weeks ago. And for those listeners who may not know, WordCamp is a WordPress conference. I don't use WordPress because I'm a software engineer and a web developer, and I do it all by myself, but I thought everybody else is using WordPress, so let me see. So I'm making connections in that realm. And my big thing that is a running theme for me when I started Social Sidekick, which is my LLC, my I think LLC is limited liability company, a couple of years ago, because I was going to be a social media marketer, because I had been laid off from a job. And I marketed it as best as I could, but in the smaller market that is Tucson, it was kind of hard to really get that up and running. So I kept the name of the company and put up my own website, did my own work. But then I realized, as much fun as that is, my website doesn't look as professional and as slick as a lot of other ones do. So I decided I'm going to get into WordPress. But in the interim, everybody said, oh, you know what? You need to join a mastermind group because this is where it all happens. So Napoleon Hill wrote this book almost 100 years ago called Think and Grow Rich. And he interviewed a lot of people who were very, very successful business people. Mostly, I would assume they're all businessmen because I have read the book, and entrepreneurs. And it was basically, let me pick your brain and see what works for you. And so I thought, well, I'm going to join a mastermind group. And every time I found somebody that I knew that was in a mastermind group, I said, hey, can I join? Can I come? And, oh, no, we're not taking any new members. And so I thought, how am I ever going to learn what I need to learn? So kind of podcasting does that for me in a way. And I also have a podcasters meetup group locally. But I've also decided that the next thing that I'm going to do, my next task, and I had a list of projects and I've kind of shuffled them around a little bit, but my next project is to start my own mastermind group. So after the first of the year, I'm going to be launching an international mastermind group, if you will. Initially, and I'm still working out the details, initially I'm thinking that it's going to be free so that I can get people involved and see who's interested. It's going to be podcasters centric. So it'll be a podcaster mastermind. So people who want to learn about podcasting, learn how to be better podcasters, start a podcast. I mean, there's a lot of mastermind groups out there already and people who are experts in the field. And in fact, it was Cliff Ravenscraft, who is a very well-known podcaster. He has podcastmastermind.com, but he shut that group down a few years ago. And so I believe there's a market for it. And I'm not talking a monetary market. I think there's a market in the sense that people will be interested in joining this. And if it seems to work out, then I may start charging down the road. There's that movie called Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. If they build it, they will come. Well, I'm going to build my own mastermind group. So that's what's leading me into my next entrepreneurial journey. Now, with entrepreneurial journeys, we always hope that you can make some money at it, but sometimes you have to give it away for free before you can charge for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly been true of my experience in terms of getting things going, putting stuff out there, seeing what resonates with people. And also my experience with mastermind groups, they've been incredibly powerful and most useful when trying to develop and shape my own business ideas. I read in your bio, Laurie, that you volunteer your social media skills for your nation's oldest and largest youth mentoring organization. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, that's not 100% true. So I volunteer my social media skills for an organization called SCORE, but I'm a volunteer for the Big Brothers Big Sisters. I don't do social media for them. But SCORE is, and I can't remember what the SCORE acronym is for, but basically this is an organization, and it's a national organization in the United States. I don't know if they're overseas, but I know they're here, that offers people who want to start their own business information and mentorship. So, for example, I could go to them and say, I want to start this podcast mastermind and make some money at it. What do I do? And they would tell me, here's how to write a business plan, or here's how to set up your LLC, or here's how to do a webinar, or here's how to do social media. So they not only have webinars themselves and workshops, some of which they charge for and some of which are free at local libraries, but they mentor people. So you can ask to be mentored by somebody who might have some expertise in that field. Most of these volunteers are older, retired, excuse the expression, white guys. There are some women, but the demographic is changing because these are the people that actually have time to give to other people to volunteer as mentors. Plus they have business acumen and they have business experience. So they offer this for free and it's a great service. And there are other local organizations and national organizations that do this for free or do this for a fee. And they're essentially business coaches. And we all know there are a lot of business coaches out there that charge, but these people do it for free in most cases, at least the mentoring part. And I've always thought, even though I do their social media, it'd be great to be one of their clients, except again, I get back to what do I want to do when I grow up?
Let's talk about your podcast, actually. I'd love to ask you about your podcast at this point. And what inspired you to create the Social Sidekick podcast in the first instance? What was the initial inspiration? Can you remember the time you came up with the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of years ago, I think it was, 2014. So it's almost been 3 years ago. Like I said, I had been laid off from a job in late 2013. And I thought, I have all these computer skills. What can I do with these computer skills to try and do something in the interim before I find another job? And so I thought, well, I'll start this social media marketing company. So I started doing a lot of research online and found Social Media Examiner that's based out of San Diego. And a month later, they were having their annual social media marketing world. So I went to that event. It was absolutely wonderful. People from all over the world attend this. And I learned a lot, went to all the sessions that I could fit in because, of course, they have sessions if you're looking at podcasting or blogging or Facebook. Unfortunately, sometimes these sessions are at the same time. And I made some contacts with some people. And this one gentleman named Sean Ayala said to me, you should look into podcasting. And it's like, why would I do that? And he was just really excited about podcasting. He had actually started or was in the process of starting a 5-minute a day, 5 days a week. I don't think it was 7. I think it was 5 days a week, just a 5-minute podcast. And he did it for a year, and then he stopped because he moved into other things. But he's well known in the social media sphere. So I thought, I'll look into podcasting. Right now, I need to learn other stuff, but maybe next year I'll look into podcasting. So 2015 came around. I went to Social Media Marketing World again and sat in on all of the podcasting sessions and listened to John Lee Dumas and listened to Cliff Ravenscraft and Daniel J. Lewis and all of these big movers and shakers in podcasting. And I thought this sounds like it would be kind of fun because I'm a techie type of person, so I'd like to play with the equipment. Plus, years ago, when I first went to college, before I figured out what I wanted to do, I was a theater major. And I also volunteered years ago at a radio station. And so I've always had in the back of my mind that I thought I would be a really good interviewer because when I meet people, I like to find out about them. I like to see what makes them tick, how they met their spouses, what they think about. Try not to talk about politics, but what they think about the world in general, if they've traveled and things like that. I'm just really curious about other people. So I thought that would be fun. That would be really fun. So I joined John Lee Dumas's Podcaster's Paradise. And the one thing that is their mantra that they say over and over and over again is that you have to have a niche. You need to pick a niche. And I was thinking, well, what could I niche myself into? And I thought, well, why not talk about the same thing that you're trying to do, which is a journey from being a worker bee to being an entrepreneur. And what are the main things about that? Well, it would be a marketing strategy or not having a marketing strategy, business tactics, things like that, how you would network. So in other words, how you get the word out that, hey, you're in business and social media is really big. It's a different kind of marketing. It's a newer paradigm for marketing in the last, 10 years or so. So talk to people about that. And then I thought, well, I listened to a lot of podcasts, and to me, most good podcasts have a formula. There's a gal out of San Diego who always, her thing is, all right, I think this is hers. You dropped on an island, you have $500. I can't remember if this is John Lee Dumas's or not, but you're dropped on an island, you've got $500, you've got a computer, you've got this. What do you do in the first 48 hours? And so they do that every single time. And this person asks XYZ every single time. So that's their formula. So I've got the business strategy, networking, social media, and my formula, the last part of it is called reinvent the spiel. And spiel is a Yiddish word. And it's kind of like what you would hear when you go to buy a car at the used car lot, the sales pitch, the 30-second elevator pitch. And it's a Yiddish word. And I thought of it because it rhymed with wheel, reinvent the wheel, because I believe everything that's on this planet nothing is really new anymore. It's all been invented. We just may change it a little bit and make it look like it's new. So I asked people what was negative and how they turned it into a positive, because pretty much all of us know that if you're going to be successful at anything, you're going to have to see the glass half full instead of half empty. So that's my formula for my podcast, and I try to stay true to it. And it doesn't really matter, and you probably know this, Rob, it doesn't really matter what somebody says as much as it's just the experience of having this conversation in a podcast and learning about the person that you're talking to.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's what's so wonderful about podcasting is it is that opportunity to introduce new people to new people and make those connections. And that's certainly what I love about this podcast and what I love about yours too. On that point, you were saying there about reinventing your spiel. What's the negative that you've turned into a positive, Laurie?
The negative, and this is the same for a lot of people, is thinking that you're going to do all of this work and you're not going to be a success. So I'm thinking about this mastermind group I'm going to start and thinking about the social media company that I started that really didn't take off and thinking, I could go and do all this work and bust my butt and not have anybody either pay any attention to me, be interested. I don't market it properly, just another big goose egg, another failure. But when I think about that, I think about the fact that I've had so many successes in my life. So I went back to college in my 30s because I finally figured out what I wanted to do. And at the time, I was a single parent and I was working the night shift, working on my bachelor's degree. And so there were times when I couldn't get home between classes. I had too much time between classes, but it wasn't enough time to go home and turn around and come back and take a nap or anything. So I'd sleep in my car in the parking lot at the college. And I worked nonstop. In fact, I picked a college. I moved back home with my mom, and I picked a college that had trimesters, which very few of them, if any, have anymore. And what that means is most colleges in the United States have a fall semester and a spring semester, and maybe some summer school. Well, this one had a summer semester that was equivalent to a fall or spring, so I could actually get done a lot quicker. Plus, I had a lot of credits that I had taken over the years that I could use towards a degree because I was taking this and that and not knowing what I wanted to do. So I would sleep in the car, I would work night shift full-time, go to school full-time, and then get a degree. And then about, I think 10 years later or so, I got a master's degree. Of course, my daughter was much older then, and she could, hang out on her own. Now, she was in high school, I believe, at the time. But when I think about the fact that I may not be as successful with my future ventures as I have with my past, I look at it and I say, you know what? You were a single parent. You got your bachelor's degree. You slept in the car. You got all of that done because you were focused, you were motivated, and you decided you were going to do whatever it took to be successful, or to at least to finish this goal, to complete this task, to do this accomplishment. So I just have to make sure that I keep laser focused on my next goal. And if it's not successful, so be it, but it'll be the journey that will be the success, learning from the opportunity to have worked towards this goal.
I love that. You mentioned success a couple of times there. What does success mean to you today?
This is, it's kind of silly because so many people around the United States play the lottery hoping that they're going to be instant millionaires. And I've always thought that if I played the lottery, which I don't, because I know I'm not going to win, but if I did, I'd be happy with $100,000. I don't have to win the whole thing. So success to me is being able to maintain my lifestyle and maybe be a little bit more independent than I am right now. Because there are times when money can be really, really tight and you have to work through that stuff. There's always going to be somebody better off than you, and there's always going to be somebody worse off than you, and you shouldn't compare yourself to anybody else. So success to me would be where I would create whatever these things are. Like I'm writing a book right now on the love letters that my dad sent to my mom during the Second World War. So success to me would be that people would be interested in reading it. And it's not necessarily 1 million people read it. Maybe it's only 10 people, but it would be somebody, I guess, in a way, validating that what I did was worth the effort and it's worth a pat on the back.
You mentioned earlier about picking a niche or a niche, the Atlantic differences there. Also not knowing, that sense of not knowing what it is that you want to do. I sense in your own journey, that's been a theme that's popped up from time to time. How do you deal with that, Laurie? How do you keep focused and motivated like you were in college when you're not quite sure what the outcome's going to be or what it is that you're going to go on and do next?
Boy, that's a fabulous question. The way that I do it, the only way that I think works for me is by learning. So, for example, if I'm sitting at my computer and I want to start a mastermind group and I have never been in a mastermind group, so why would anybody be listening to me? Why would they think I was an expert? I have to learn everything I can about a mastermind group. So I go on YouTube and watch the people that have done it, that have had them. And then I go on to, there's a website called lynda.com, which is a training website that I'm a member of. I take classes on, they don't have mastermind classes, but when I was trying to learn more about some of the things associated with podcasting and sound, like compression and balance and things like that, I went on lynda.com and watched the videos and learned more about that. So for me, it's just training myself so that I'm not necessarily an expert, but I know what I'm talking about. Because somebody said in one of my podcasts, you may not be an expert, but you know at least one more thing than one person. So to them, you are the expert. And the person who knows more than you, even though it's one more thing, they're the expert for you. So it's just a matter of training myself, learning more. That helps me stay motivated. Otherwise, I'll sit at my computer and play free cell all day. Got to uninstall that from my computer. Otherwise, it's just too much of a time suck.
Yeah, got it. I love the term that you used earlier, from worker bees to business owners. That transition that you've made, what's been the biggest shift in your mindset so far?
The biggest shift has been thinking that I'm in control and that I am responsible for me. It's kind of like the brass ring that's being dangled in front of my face. Sometimes you just get to a point where you've had it with your employers, whether they're nice people or abusive people, whether it's a great place to work or a hostile work environment. After years and years of working for other people, you sometimes get to a point where you go, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. This is not fun. And I have X amount of years left to live and X amount of years left to work. So if other people can do it and become entrepreneurs and become successful, regardless of whether they're millionaires or not, if they can do it, I can do it. The only person that would hold me back is me. And so I just have to find that goal, that brass ring, that thing that's going to help me put blinders on and walk to it, as opposed to just looking at there's a shiny object over here. Let me see what that is. Oh, there's another shiny object over here. Let me see what that is. It's just a matter of trying to stay focused.
And what ways do you stay focused? I mean, you don't sound dissimilar to a lot of people I know, and that includes myself, where, we do get attracted to the shiny, bright objects from time to time. But how do you remain focused? What steps do you take to do that?
That staying focused is really hard. And when you go to school, when you have an assignment due, you have a deadline. So you have to make these kind of fake deadlines for yourself, whether it's writing it down or putting it on a schedule, putting it in some app that will remind you, hey, by this time you said you were going to do this. Have you done this? No, you haven't done it? Well, get your butt moving. Mm-hmm. Writing things down helps quite a bit. Writing things on a timeline. There's an app that I don't use as much as I should called Evernote, that you can use it on your computer, on your iPad, on your smartphone. There are calendars. There are other apps that you can set up for yourself to basically be the nag in the back of your head saying, you said you were going to do this and it's time to do this. So another way I do it is to write down goals and say them out loud and put dates on them. For example, I will record 10 podcasts and launch my podcast by August of 2015, which is what I did. You have to redo those goals periodically, because if you say, okay, I'm going to create 5 more podcasts that talk to people who make $1 million a year, and I'm going to have these recorded by December 1st of 2016, and you only have 2 of those in the bank, December 1st is coming up pretty quick, so sometimes you have to rephrase that goal and change the date. The goal is still there. You just shuffle it a little bit and put it out in the future a little bit more, not too far, so that you can be a little naughty and not pay attention and kind of not work hard at it. You just maybe shove it out a little bit, like a week or something, or a couple of weeks, but you have to keep your mind on the prize and you have to be disciplined. Discipline is the whole big thing, and that's hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, I like what you said there about keeping your mind on the prize, and also about giving yourself that accountability, actually putting deadlines around goals as well. I think sometimes that's where we can lose track. We have these ideas in mind, but we don't really fix a date necessarily to those ideas and those goals. And I found in my own experience, when I have set a date and said it's got to happen by then things have really sort of shifted and happened. I'd like to go back a little bit, back to that time where you were in that career and you were finding it dissatisfying. Can you tell me about the reality of that situation for you, and how did you handle it in the first instance? And also, what did you then do to change something?
There was a position I was hired into as a software engineer. And when I got there, I was hired by people who have no idea what IT people do. And these are people that work on grants for funding for projects in a nonprofit. And so I was working for these people, and for a year, there was no coding, there was no programming, it was all hands on deck. Let's work as, working on this grant. And I thought, I'm a technical person. I'm not a grant writer. I don't know how to do this. And so I would watch people do their jobs, because I wanted to create solidarity and a sense of team to show them that I was a team player. But I was very, very, very unhappy. And what I normally do when I'm unhappy with something like that is I look for another job. Well, in this town, sometimes it's hard to look. Well, you can always look, but you can't necessarily find things because Tucson is the area where I live, and it's a pretty big city, but it's not as big as some other places like San Jose, California, where Silicon Valley is, Mountain View, New York City, Chicago, or even Phoenix. So the opportunities are just not there. I had worked for the biggest private employer in town for 5.5 years, and that's where I had been laid off from. So the other big employer is the university, and they pay horribly. And I've also heard that a lot of people that work at the university aren't necessarily happy because even though it's a public university, it is still considered public versus private sector. I've worked other jobs in the public sector. I prefer private because it seems, and this is what gives public sector a bad name, some people are there and they really want to work hard and be good at what they do, and that's great. But some people, they're civil servants and they can sit there all day and read the newspaper with their feet up on the desk and not do any work. And that is not motivating for other people. It's not really nice. So you get in an environment where other people's bad habits can rub off on you. And it's pretty tough. So I figured, sometimes just the idea and the experience of finding another job will make you feel better, at least for a little while. But it's like a Band-Aid. It's not anything that's going to help you in the long run. So what I usually do is I look for other opportunities, either in other departments to volunteer my services, or I try to find legitimate volunteer opportunities where I can volunteer my time or my social media skills or my computer skills in the chance that I can make new friends, new networking partners, and possibly they know of a job somewhere else. Because at least around here, they say that the majority of jobs are not found through the want ads or online. They're through networking, through people that you know. So what I try to do is try to stay motivated. And if there's not work for me to do in the field that I'm supposed to be doing it in, because of, unfortunately, this was the only job that was offered at the time, and I'd been out of work for a couple of months. And so I took what I could get. Then I revert to what I normally do, which I mentioned earlier, which is I just start training myself. I learn new skills, and I have every opportunity that I can take to try and put those skills into action. So, for example, if I learn in a computer language, I try to use a computer language that I can use in a website or something to get some practical experience. The problem, unfortunately, for many of us is that employers want you to have used that experience in a work environment in a fairly recent time frame. So if you haven't done that for a few years, well, you know what? There are 10 other people that I can interview that have done that yesterday. So the competition can be really stiff. So I basically just keep my, head above water in the sense that I try and learn stuff and see if I can find another job. But in the meantime, I'm working on these side projects so that if and when this comes up again, if I get laid off again, because unfortunately IT has that history, or if I've worked for companies that have gone out of business, you lose your job that way. That's another reason why it has motivated me to become an entrepreneur, so that nobody is in control of my success or failure but me.
Yeah, I like that. That's empowering. I love this idea of almost taking ownership of your own destiny. You said one of the reasons that you really love doing your podcast is you like finding out what makes people tick. I'd love to ask you that question too, Laurie. What is it that makes you tick?
This is an interesting question because I am by design, by genetics or whatever, an introvert. It's not that I prefer my own company, but I'm so used to being alone. I've always been alone. I had a sister and I had great parents, but growing up, my sister and I were not close. And so I'm just used to being alone. So what's funny about this whole thing is I told my daughter a few years ago when I started the social media marketing, I said, it's kind of funny that you have somebody who's antisocial do social media. But yeah, I do enjoy being alone. But it's also, as I get older, I realize there's such a wealth of experience that you can get from other people just by sitting there and talking to them. And when you network with somebody or do a one-on-one, you can't really get in depth as if they were a close friend of yours, or if you're interviewing them on a podcast, because you control the questions and you don't have distractions. So I find as I get older that, I still love being alone and doing, like I travel alone, because if I waited for somebody who had money or time off, I'd be waiting forever and never get anywhere. But I found that I really, really enjoy, like when I go to a conference, when I went to Podcast Movement this summer, and meeting like-minded people, and not people that are just identical to you, but people that have like a common thread, like podcasting or blogging. And so I try to go to meetups that are here locally on blogging or podcasting or coding as a way to expand my universe, so to speak, of people that I know. And there's a ton of people that I've friended or have asked me to be their friends on Facebook. And a lot of that is really shallow. You know, you're not really conversing with anybody. You're not really making those connections. You try to engage people on social media and they don't answer back. They may click a like button and that's the extent of their engagement. But when you podcast, when you interview people, like when you and I have had our conversations, I learned a lot about you when you were on my show and you're learning a lot about me on yours now. To me, it's a much more rich experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really grateful to have you on the show today because it's fascinating to learn more about you and the person behind the podcast series that you have. On that theme, you've had some fabulous guests on your podcast series so far. I had the pleasure of interviewing Kelly Roach, who you had on there not so long ago. That was a fabulous interview, listening to you talk to her. And my wife and I loved, was it the tango or the salsa dancer?
The salsa dancer, yeah.
There? That was a fabulous interview. Which have been some of your personal favourites so far in terms of guests?
Well, Kelly was great. And in fact, somebody, I can't remember who this was, it was one of my guests a few months ago that said, we were commiserating that sometimes it's hard to get guests. And, you know, you ask a bunch of people and for some reason it's not hitting. So he suggested putting up what he calls classic episodes, which are also known as reruns. So I've done that a couple of times when I've been on vacation or I haven't had the opportunity to have a guest lined up. And so I decided, in fact, a few weeks ago, it's about 2 or 3 weeks, just recently, that I didn't have a guest. I had some people that were lined up, but it wasn't going to be in time for that particular week. So I reran Kelly's interview as a classic episode. And what's even sometimes better about that is you interview these people once, you tell them they're going to be on, they let their community know, and then down the road you do it again and they let their community know again, and they start tweeting more about it, like, oh, wow, now I'm a classic episode. Now, she may have thought that that was a really cool thing, and I think it is a really cool thing, but it was just basically, it was a fill-in, it was a rerun. But Kelly was great. There was a gentleman who was in the military for many, many years. And when he got out of the military, he thought that he would figure out what he wanted to do. You know, it's always somebody who had a really long career doing something. And, well, you know, a lot of these people have businesses that aren't really well known. They're not that big. But some of them are people that are really well known, and some of them have a really, really interesting niche or niche. So, for example, there's a friend of mine. I used to work with this guy when I worked at IBM. Actually, I was working at Raytheon at the time. It was in an old IBM building, named Steve Lacey, and he's very, very active in his church. And so what he did was he was doing websites on the side and set up this business called streamingchurch.tv, where if people can't get to church services or synagogue services or whatever services, they can set up a streaming service for their parishioners. That was so unique, just talking to him about that. Another friend of mine has an insurance company. A couple people that I've interviewed, they're local people, friends of mine, that have insurance companies. There was a gal named Andrea Walsh, who is another great, great interview. She has a company with her husband called Go for No. And she sent me her book. It's great when people send me their books. I just interviewed another author and she sent me her book. That's a lot of fun. In fact, when my book is done, I'll be sending it to people when they interview me as well. As I look at the list of the people that I've had on, it's very, very diverse. A lot of business coaches, because even people that have been doing something for years, part of it seems to also be being a business coach. Sometimes that's what they start out as, and sometimes they start out as something else and figure, hey, I could teach people how to do this as well, so I will become a business coach. And a lot of them, in relation to being business coaches, are also speakers. And so some of the things on my bucket list of things to do is I want to be a speaker. I want to be a public speaker because I was, like I said, a theater major originally. I have no problem getting up in front of people. I have no trouble with nerves or anything getting up in front of people and talking. I just have to figure out what I want to talk about. So I have, and this would be a really long story for this podcast, but I have a story that is totally not business related, but it has to do with the fact that I was adopted. And I met my birth family, my cousins and my aunts, not my biological mother, because she's been dead for many years. And I kind of sort of didn't want to meet her after I found out what she was like. But the whole journey of finding that birth family years ago, before the internet even existed, so it was looking through phone books and things like that. That's an interesting story. It's a really interesting story, but it's not something that people in business want to hear. So I have to find those niches, those people, whether they're adoptees or women's organizations or whatever the thing is, that may be interested in that kind of story. So in the meantime, I have to come up with stories for business so that when I present myself as a speaker and an expert on whatever it is I'm going to be an expert on someday, that people say, yeah, we'd like to have you as a speaker. Come on down.
That's quite a surprise to me, because you mentioned earlier that you're a bit of an introvert, and I would not have guessed that from your podcast and the way you wonderfully host the show. It's really surprising to me that you find it very easy to be a public speaker as well. I read somewhere, I don't know if this is a myth or a quote, but many people fear public speaking more than dying. Where do you think that confidence comes from? Have you always had that confidence for speaking in front of people?
Not sure. So I know I used to like to entertain my mom when I was growing up. I'd put on funny clothing and come out into the den when she was watching TV, or into the kitchen and make her laugh, and then just go back and put on some other goofy outfit. And I've always been a dancer as well. So I was a tap dancer as a kid, and I was actually in a women's performing tap dancing group for a few years. So I didn't really have any problems getting up in front of people. And I also was a member, I think this is international as well, an organization called Toastmasters, which is a public speaking organization. And you work through different types of speeches. So for example, the first speech you would do would be an icebreaker, where you would just break the ice and tell people a little bit about what you know. And the speeches are timed, and they have people that sit around the table that listen, that give you auditory cues, like with a clicker when you say or ah or If you have a word, like I have these crutch words like the word so, I also have a crutch word for whatever, which are words that I use too often. They will click the clicker to remind you that you're using your crutch word. And so and I just said, so the process of learning how to do this and going through this, you go through 10 speeches at different times. You prepare for them, you have topics, and then you get, I think it's a competent Toastmasters or some designation. And you can work your way up to national competitions. I did that for many years. Again, you have to get up in front of people and talk. So I've never been, I guess, scared of that, just from a performing background. Of course, I would want to be the most prepared that I could possibly be, because there's nothing worse than getting up and not knowing what you're doing. In fact, that reminds me, this is totally weird, as I totally forgot this, is that when I was getting my undergraduate degree, my minor was in speech, because I had all these drama credits, all these theater credits. So I thought, well, I'm going to use these. So I had a minor in speech. And I remember getting up and doing this one speech on voting and how important it was to vote. Part of the speech had to do with these hanging chads. And if the people that are listening don't know what a hanging chad is, you're lucky. It's a lot of ballots in the United States are very different. Some are paper ballots where you take a black marker and you fill in a little oval. And some of them used to be where you get this little, almost like this needle, and you would poke out a little perforated piece of paper, and that hole would be read by a computer, and they would tally your vote, knowing that that's who you were voting for by the lack of that little piece of paper in that location. And that little piece of paper, that little thing you would poke out, is called a chad. And so I went off on this little tangent during this speech, and I tried to get as animated as I possibly could to say, and one of the reasons that I like to vote is because I really like to poke that little piece of paper out of the thing. And so I figured, in order to be successful or to have people know who you are, they need to make their mark. They need to stand out from the rest of the cows in the herd. And whether it's being animated, or whether it's dyeing your hair purple, or whether it is wearing the weirdest clothes that you possibly can, we all want to be considered individuals, and we all want people to think that, there's something special about us, because I think most of us, when we were growing up, thought that when we got to be adults, we'd be special. And then we get to be adults and we realize we're no more special than the next person. We're not the Taylor Swift or the Benedict Cumberbatch or the whoever, Helen Mirren. We're just, Joe or Jane, regular citizen. So the confidence basically is me just trying to stand out from the herd. There was a line in a movie that if you package bologna with the right kind of packaging and you market it properly, people will buy it and think it's filet mignon. So it's kind of like trying to make yourself be confident by telling yourself you are confident. Mm-hmm. So if you keep on repeating the mantra, I am a confident person, I am eternal, immortal, universal, and infinite, whatever the thing that you're trying to become, I believe you can, in a way, talk yourself into it, and then it'll become part of you.
Yeah, I like that. It's almost having to sort of fake it before you make it in that sense.
Exactly.
That's a big life lesson there. Absolutely. On which theme, I'd love to ask you, what have been some of the biggest lessons or insights that you've received, from hosting your show?
Well, I know that pretty much everybody that I've spoken with, they're successful in their own little area, and they wanted it bad enough that they were willing to work really hard to do it. That's definitely a running theme. I also believe, although I can't prove this necessarily, that a lot of the people that I've interviewed give the impression that they are very successful and they really haven't made it yet. So it's what you just said, fake it before you make it. I think a lot of this, not a lot, but some of the people that I've interviewed, they give the impression that, I am the best massage therapist in New York City, or I have the biggest web development company in the greater Midwestern area. And if you actually do some research on them, they're not as big or as successful as they make it sound. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with tooting your own horn until you become as successful as you would like. So people aren't necessarily going to hire somebody if they say, I tried to be successful in this and I only have 2 customers and I only have 1 person that listens to my podcast. What I've learned is that you have to fake it before you make it. You have to have that positive self-talk. You have to learn from your mistakes and look forward and work towards the future. And try not to dwell on the past, because if you think of all the ways that you screwed up and all the mistakes that you've made, you're just going to dwell on that stuff and you're not ever going to be able to move forward and try and be successful. So every single one of these people that I've interviewed had bad stuff happen to them, like we all have. And they've all decided to, again, the cliche, take the lemons and make lemonade out of it. And some of their lemonade is sweeter than others, but we're still working on getting those lemons squeezed so that we can make a success of our lives.
Yeah, you've clearly been through a lot and you've got a lot of great life experience behind you. With all of that in mind, what have been some of the big life lessons that you've learned? If somebody was listening to this right now and thinking about making similar transitions in their own lives to some of the ones that you've made, and you strike me as somebody who has no problem following their own curiosity, what ideas or suggestions would you give them to help them with their own confidence, perhaps pursuing or following a dream or an idea that they have?
Well, so the first one is something that my dad always told me. And being, like I said, being adopted, I was so very lucky. I had the best parents on the planet. And I know people will arm wrestle me and say, no, they had the best parents, but I really did have a great set of parents. My dad, so this back a few decades ago, and this when women, feminism was, so I'm older, I'm a baby boomer. And back then, most women that went to college became teachers or they became nurses. And my dad always said to me, you can do whatever you want as long as you put your mind to it. So he wasn't putting me in a box and he wasn't telling me that I had to be a teacher or a nurse. I wanted to go to school, to college for theater, for drama. And he said, go for it. My mom said, go for it. So he knew that I was capable of doing anything that I wanted to do as long as I wanted it hard enough. And of course, there's some things that we know I'm not necessarily going to achieve, like becoming president of the United States, which I would never want to do, or being an A-list actress like somebody like Meryl Streep. Certain things really aren't necessarily attainable. There's a lot of luck associated with that. But the things that are attainable, and that's the majority of things, like whether I wanted to be a plumber or whether I wanted to be a construction worker and work on an 80-story building. If I wanted to do it bad enough, all I had to do was work at it and not limit myself. So he always told me, you can do whatever you want to as long as you want to do it hard enough. And so that's why I was able to get that degree when I was a single parent and sleep in my car and then get a master's degree and start this podcast. But the other thing that I would think is very important is you cannot be afraid to take risks. You cannot be afraid to say, you know what, I'm going to eat macaroni and cheese for the next year because I have no money, but I'm working on my dream and I'm going to achieve it. And sometimes you have to eat the ramen noodles and the macaroni and cheese because there's no money and hopefully your lights haven't been turned off and your water is still running. But that doesn't mean it's going to always be like that. So you have to be able and willing to take a risk because without it, you're going to stay in the same place. Now, some people invest in stocks and bonds, and some of them are very risky, and some of them are they will pay a certain amount of money every month. They're very, very non-risky, for lack of a better term. But the biggest rewards in life, whether it's monetary or whether it's emotional, is where you take the biggest risks. There's what's called the upside-downside ratio. The bigger the risk, sometimes the bigger reward. And upside-downside, that doesn't make sense with what I just said. But you have to take those risks because in the end, it's kind of like getting a deep tissue massage. It can be really painful. They can be pressing really hard and hurting you. And then afterwards, you're going, that's exactly what I needed. So sometimes it's got to hurt for it to feel really good after the fact.
I love that. That's fantastic. Before we wrap up, Laurie, tell me about your new book that you're writing. So my dad was drafted during the Second World War. I grew up in a Jewish family, and this was, when they were exterminating 6 million Jews and a bunch of gypsies and a bunch of other people in Nazi Germany and in Europe. And so he wrote my mother these love letters. And what's interesting about this is that he was about 32 when he married my mom, and she was 26. She was raised Roman Catholic. He was raised Orthodox Jew. And some of the letters talk about how they don't really care what other people think. This was the 1940s. They didn't really care what other people think because this was a mixed marriage, keep in mind. And so some of the stories, like there's family history and family lore that I've always loved, always wanted to know about my mom's background, my dad's background, and that kind of leads into the podcasting thing I like to interview people. So when they got married in California, because he was stationed there before he was shipped over to Europe, they went to the courthouse and they were going to get married and they didn't have any witnesses. And so they decided they were going to have to find some witnesses. So my dad ran one way, my mom ran the other way in the building. And one of them, I can't remember which one, came back with an African-American cleaning lady. And they paid her something like $5 and asked her if she would stand up for them in their wedding. And she said, sure. So this is 1943, I think it was. And that says a lot because unfortunately, this country has a whole history of prejudice and racism. And luckily, and I was blessed with these parents, I was raised to be colorblind. So I was always raised to see people as equals, no matter their religion, their ethnicity, their color. And of course, we all have our own prejudices that we may get as we grow older because of experiences that we've had. But I had these great, great parents. And unfortunately, because my dad was overseas, he was not able to bring back the letters that my mom wrote to him. So I only have his letters. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking the letters and I started this about 5 years ago and only got through a few letters and then stopped because it was a lot of typing. But now I have voice recognition software. So I'm reading the letters in, correcting them as after they're typed in by the computer. So on one side of the page, I will have the actual image of the letter itself. And on the facing page, I will have the text of the letter. And then I will throw in some other stories about growing up. I've got thousands of letters. So this is going to be a pretty big book, but I'm going to have to weed out some of this stuff. But I'm also going to talk about the story of my adoption. And everybody has at least one book in them, and it's just a matter of whether it's interesting to anybody else. But I've spoken to a few people that have, one gal who's a podcaster that I know, she wants to interview me for her show as well. And one of her podcasts, she's got a few of them, has to do with World War II.
And so this was very fascinating to her. And I have other people that say, oh, that sounds like it's really going to be nice. Now, are they just saying that or do they mean it? They probably mean it. Will they read it? Who knows? But it doesn't matter because to me, it's more a labor of love. And sometimes you have to just do projects for yourself. So I'm going to do this. I am doing this project for myself, but I'm going to put it out, probably self-publish, put it on Amazon, put it somewhere out there. And we'll see who it resonates with. And if, like the podcast, if it gets 20 to 50 people or 200,000 people, it's not, oh, I'm going to write this book and make a lot of money. It's not that. It's just, if I don't do something like this is all going to disappear. So here's my sad story. My daughter is not interested in family lore or family history. That just doesn't resonate with her. And if she didn't look just like me, I would have thought that they switched babies in the hospital when I brought her home. But I have all these letters, and when I die, where are these letters going to go? She's not going to want them. And I don't know if my nieces or nephew are going to want any of this stuff. I have other things from my parents, jewelry or cutlery. I have my mother's mahjong set. And for those of you who don't know what mahjong is, Google it. But she's not going to want it. So I either have to donate these artifacts to museums if anybody's interested, or they're going to end up sadly in a landfill somewhere. So I want to take whatever I can. In this instance, it's the letters, it's the content, the intellectual property, which is not quite the right word. It's more like content in these letters and have them for posterity, because the letters may be destroyed at one point, but the book can hopefully live on.
Wonderful. Well, you must keep me posted about how the book goes.
Thank you very much. Yeah. That was supposed to be my next project was the book, but then I started all these other side projects and the book kind of got shifted to the rear of the bus.
It happens. Laurie, what's inspired you most recently?
What's inspired me recently? Ooh, that's a good question. It's more like what hasn't inspired me. So right now I'm going through a struggle, and the struggle is to keep motivated. And it's not coming from any external source in the sense that people are telling me I'm not good enough for anything. It has more to do with my own internal, I'm not good enough, because it's kind of like driving down the Autobahn and seeing all these people passing you. And it's not that your car isn't as fast as their cars. It's just that you're just not getting the horsepower that you need to get going. What's motivating me is to try and break out of my rut, to try and to get past my little period, and we all have them, a little period of stagnation where I've got these projects, I've got these deadlines. Oh, I want to sit in front of the TV with Netflix for the next 2 days and binge watch Breaking Bad or something like that. Sometimes you have to take time out and say, you know what, I am going to binge watch. I am going to play Free Cell for 2 hours straight. So what keeps me motivated is the thought that nobody's going to do it but me. And if I don't do it, nobody will probably notice except for me. But then is that what I want my legacy to be? Somebody who could have done better and just sat on their butt and binge watched for 2 days.
And what are you grateful for today?
Well, first of all, I'm grateful for you, for your friendship, for having me on your podcast, because I think you're an awesome person. And I'm also grateful that this is going to sound so funny. I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to live in a free country where I can turn off the news. So I've been, and I'm not going to get too political, but I've been a kind of like a political junkie for a long time. And I'm not happy with how things turned out recently. And I figured the best way for it to not affect me is just not to listen, just to tune out the news. So I'm going to go on with my happy life, doing my podcast, interviewing great people, making great friends like you, and just not listen to the news because I choose not to be depressed.
Yeah, the power of choice. Finally, where can our listener find out more about you and, of course, your podcast and all of your other work, Laurie?
Well, it's all going to be up on socialsidekickpodcast.com, which is the website. I have episodes up there on the blog. They say that with any of this stuff, you have to be consistent. And I consistently get my podcast out every Tuesday morning, but I do not consistently get the blog out because I haven't figured out what I want to do with that. But you can find it all, whether it's consistent or not, at socialsidekickpodcast.com.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Laurie.
Thank you so much for yours, Rob.
Thanks for listening. Nothing beats the stories and advice of an expert to help you raise your creative game. I would love to know what you thought about today's episode, so don't forget to subscribe in iTunes, where you can rate and review the show. If you like this episode, I invite you to share it on Facebook or Twitter with the one person you know who will benefit from the wisdom shared here today. You can find the show notes on inspirationalcreatives.com/podcast. If you have a burning question or a great idea for a guest, head on over to inspirationalcreatives.com/contact, where you can connect with me there.